So, welcome everybody to this afternoon's discussion by Workers' International Network. As we know, Trump has made his way into a supposed peace deal in Palestine, which we can hardly begin to imagine the horrors that are going to come out of that, because of course Trump never does anything that's not for Trump or in his interest. So you know the although the immediate killings sort of more or less cease, there's still stuff going on that this is awful. But on the other hand, we've had a huge, massive international reaction to what's going on, massive demonstrations in different parts of the world, and even a general strike. So Matthew's going to introduce the subject, Palestine and the global Intifada. He's indicated he wants to speak for about 20-25 minutes, so I'll give him a shout after 20, and we'll see if he is finished or he wishes to continue. All right. Go on, Matthew.
Okay, thank you, comrades. Yeah, I shall go and show you a few slides. Anyway, right, okay. If I can get the thing as a slide, start first slide. Okay, right, okay. People see that? Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
It struck me when I was thinking about this that our dear leader, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer, said, "Well, the globalised Intifada is obviously a terrible anti-Semitic slogan, and we can't have it." And I was sitting there thinking, well, we've already had a globalised Intifada. You know, obviously, Intifada means struggle. So yes, we have had what is effectively the largest I think is the largest solidarity movement in history, in those terms. So what we've seen is something that goes all around, going all around the world. Has actually hit every country, particularly obviously importantly the imperialist countries, and in some cases we've seen demonstrations. The largest demonstrations in history in those countries, like Australia, and I'm hoping I'm not freezing too much, or the 5 million who demonstrated in Dhaka, in Bangladesh, which is effectively everybody who could physically fit into Dhaka and get there. So you can say that's essentially the whole population had decided to demonstrate in support of the Palestinians, and the regime, of course, then had to make concessions in terms of, trying to sever even more links with Israel. I think that the thing is, what we've seen in global terms is a general revulsion, the site of a genocide, which has been live streamed by the journalistic community in Gaza, which is an extraordinary thing. I mean, obviously we've seen some terrible invasions and appalling barbaric acts by imperialism, and I think that the other thing, of course, is to qualify this. Of course, is to say that while it's the IDF has carried out the genocide in Gaza, it's actually been directly on behalf of the entire imperial machine. And I think that's really important, and I think that's one of the things that people don't really seem to understand. And we should actually making the point. This is an imperialist genocide, not merely an Israeli genocide. As I say, general revulsion. And if you look at the opinion polls, there's been lots and lots of opinion polls. They're very interesting to see. You can see in virtually every country that the whole thing has moved towards sympathy towards the Palestinians, away from the Israelis. Even I think the Washington Post actually conducted an opinion poll of U.S. Jews, and even among U.S. Jews, well, as you would expect, actually, because the U.S. Jewish community, certainly the youth, have been among the leading people in terms of the anti-war movement and the anti-genocide movement in the U.S. But it does show this huge movement, which is obviously makes things very, very difficult for the Israelis. And the thing is also, you see, in those terms, it's also fed into a series, local revolts, and it's become an issue on a world scale. I mean, it's the only thing that's really done that, I think, in those terms. That certainly in the last several generations, that we've seen, this huge movement, and it feeds into things like the revolt we discussed the other week in Indonesia. Because Indonesia obviously has quite strong links with the community in Gaza. And obviously, there's been a tremendous movement in support of the Palestinians in Indonesia, and that feeds straight into the revolt, as I say, and particularly then obviously in a place like Morocco, which we'll discuss a bit more as we go on here. But I think it's very important that clearly, that. I mean, what we're seeing, is the Arab regimes are clearly in support of Israel, whereas the Arab peoples are generally, as we would expect. solidly in support of the Palestinians, and this applies in Morocco. And of course, it becomes particularly stark because I mean the regime itself, the king and his regime, are particularly keen on their agreement with the Israelis, and have collaborated militarily, are buying Israeli military equipment, whereas the mass of the population regard that as a mark of shame, and it's become an issue in terms of this the rising revolt in Morocco. It's challenged governments, as we've seen in Italy with the general strike. I mean, general strikes are always political. They always pose the question of class power every time, And precisely the great thing about this particular strike, as I say, going to further, is that it was explicitly in support of the Palestinians, the political general strike, which is an extraordinary thing and really very significant. And it's also, of course, it's also brought down the caretaker government in the Netherlands, which I think most people just didn't of course get much comment, but actually one of the parties withdrew from the caretaker government, effectively brought the thing down because of the Palestine movement. The fact that you get regular demonstrations in the Netherlands of 250,000 people or more, which is enormous, and the Netherlands is not that big. So what you're seeing is these huge demonstrations in support of the Palestinians in a mass movement. And as I say, I think really also to say, well, all of this is being driven. A lot of it has been driven by the efforts of the journalistic community and the media work community of Gaza. It's an extraordinary job that they've done. Under conditions, as has been made clear, that with the genocide, that the effort has been to exterminate the journalistic community. I think there's been according to whose count you take, at least 250 journalists have been killed. It's the most lethal conflict for journalists ever. I mean, that actually is more journalists than virtually all the wars you can think of in the last 100 years put together. The fact that, as I say, as it is a genocide, the IDF has attempted to wipe out entire categories of workers and intellectuals and so on, and journalists, of course, are chief among those, because obviously there's this key question: well, can we get the truth out in front of the masses? And they've done that. Somebody actually said that they were the best journalists, the finest journalists in history, and I think there's a case for that. The fact that they've actually done that at the cost of their own lives, and the fact that they've continued to do it at risk, desperate risk of their own lives. What we've also seen, of course, is appalling level of propaganda. I mean, really bad propaganda of that from the imperialist press in particular. I mean, you can't read the stuff half the time. And it's been one of these stories been very difficult to track. I mean, even you can read the Middle Eastern press and so on, the Israeli press, and everybody, all of it has a different story. But the imperialist media has been absolutely desperately bad and basically converted into a fairly third-rate propaganda operation. The alternatives have been important too, because what we've seen actually is that this has been the effort against this, in many ways, in the imperialist countries, has been driven by independent journalists working on websites. Some very significant ones in terms of things like Drop Site News in the US. Matt Kennard and Declassified UK in Britain. There's a very, very good website in Ireland, and I don't know if Irish comrades have any knowledge of it, called The Ditch, which has done some extraordinary work, which I'll go into more, and so on. And Democracy Now! In the US again as well. I think the other thing, of course, the final point on this is the what's happened in Yemen. Yemen is extremely significant. One, Yemen has sealed off the Red Sea, which is one of the world's great shipping lanes, which of course has done enormous damage to the Israelis, and also, of course, has really put the screws on the Egyptian regime as well, because obviously the Egyptian regime relies on income from the Suez Canal, and that's been cut off by the action of the Yemenis. Now, the Yemenis actually, of course, have seen major effort by US imperialism to break that interdiction of the Red Sea. The US Navy actually described that as the largest sea battle it has conducted since the Second World War. That's the US Navy, and they lost. I mean, there wasn't a question that it was on points or there was this and that or the rest of it. They lost. But I don't think people quite really appreciate the importance of that that two carrier groups worth of the US Navy have been driven off. And they signed an agreement basically saying, well, the Yemenis can carry on and do what they want to do. We're out of here. The Americans actually fired off, I think, in excess of $2 billion worth of missiles in an effort to see off the assorted projectiles fired by the Yemenis, drones and missiles, etc., and left because they were, apart from anything else, running out of missiles because they don't make that many of them anymore. Which is another interesting thing. So, I mean, in those terms, that has to be wanted in mind. Now, the second thing, I'll give you a map of the Mediterranean. Now, the Mediterranean becomes extremely important because two things. Well, there's a number of factors thrown in this one. One is, of course, the interdiction of the Red Sea, which means that the Mediterranean now is a closed bag. If you're the global, if you are the global logistics company of the genocide, in this case Maersk of Denmark, and you're running a global operation, you don't want to be going around into the Mediterranean and then turning around and coming back out again. There are essentially two shipping operations which have run everything into Israel. One is Maersk. The other one is what's called the Military Sea Lift Command of the US, which has shipped other parts and particularly the ammunition. Now Maersk actually runs, as I say, it's a global operation. So the problem for Maersk, of course, is that it runs into the situation where, okay, it sends ships on a global basis, and it has some containers and bits and pieces that it wants to, 1,000 tons a month or so that goes to Israel. Now, I mean, essentially, as I say, this is an imperialist genocide. Trump put the value to the US of what it spent on the genocide at $30 billion. So essentially, the whole thing has been financed by the US, and certainly all the explosives that have been virtually all the explosives that have been used on the Gaza Strip come from the US, and much else. Much of the military equipment, the F-35 fighters, etc., driven by, as I say, US imperialism, and then of course alongside that, other imperialist countries. The problem is, of course, with this, as we can see, is if you're running this global operation, it means that essentially your large ships are going to go around Africa instead of go through the Red Sea, which means you need to transship to go to Israel. So what's happened, of course, is then you either transship what they started off. If we look at the Straits of Gibraltar on the left here, they started off transshipping at Algeciras in Spain. Algeciras in Spain. Eventually, after a year, the Spanish dockers said, "No, you're not doing that anymore," and sealed off Algeciras in November 2024, which then limited them to Tangier in Morocco. So Tangier, as we can see, the other side of just before the Strait of Gibraltar becomes critical to this question. And the question then, okay, they've had demonstrations and so on, and they've tried to stop the port of Tangier from running this particular operation. It's not been successful yet, but as I say, we're having a revolt in Morocco as we speak. Now, the thing is, what's interesting also, you see, is that in those terms is the development of the transport workers. And particularly dockers. There is a thing called the European Dock Workers Council, which has 14 members unions in 12 countries. Now they actually, of course, have been particularly active. And what's interesting on this question, of course, is that they had one of their leading members sacked in Sweden by DFDS. I think they're still in dispute on that, but they have managed to stop quite a number of shipments now to Israel, particularly military shipments. And the important thing here, I think, is actually then, as I say, also the whole question of the research by independent journalists and websites. Now, the ditch in Ireland has succeeded in getting hold of Israeli customs data. I don't know how they managed to do it, but what they've done then is to inform the dockers in various parts of Europe that we understand this shipment is coming. It's coming to this port on this day, and this is where it's come from, and this is where it's going to. Can you stop it? This has been very, very successful. They managed to stop across various ports. I mean, including Piraeus and in Greece, which is the main port in Greece, Fos, which is the port for Marseille. They managed to stop, shipments. They've managed to point out shipments from Spain, even though Spain itself, the Spanish government said, "Well, we're not moving anything." The ditch is saying, "Look, we understand that there's this shipment, which is going to a weapons company, whether it's actually bullets or what, or just steel, and it needs to be stopped." And so that, in those terms, it's been that cooperation between, research and then the industrial working class, which is what should be happening and what the left really should be doing. That it's actually had to been manufactured another way. Now, the other thing about this, of course, is that in terms of this has been the flotilla. I don't know. I'm hoping that comrades have seen the developments around the flotilla. Now, the flotilla actually originated, has been running over the whole period of the 2 years. They've basically been sending one ship after another. But the actual flotilla, they managed to send 44 vessels, basically starting in Tunis, and then picking up vessels along the way. But the important thing was the dockers in Genoa, in the north of Italy, as people will see on the map here, had a collection of material for the global Samud flotilla that was intercepted the week of the start of October, in which they collected 300 tons of assorted supplies for Gaza in 5 days, which is going some. It shows you the degree of support they've got in the local area. And they said, I mean, the dockers in Genoa then said, well, if you touch the flotilla, we'll stop everything, which they did. And that's the origin of both of the general strikes in Italy, which I believe we're having another comrade along to discuss in a week or two. And both of those driven out of transport workers in particular, and the USB unions, and originating really in among the Genoa dockers, but also of course their wider unions, and bringing much of Italy to a halt on Friday, the 3rd of October, which is, to say, is huge in those terms. So the thing is that to sort of take a summary of this, really, is this side of it, is that what we're seeing really also is the isolation of the ruling classes in numbers of countries, particularly, both in terms of imperialist countries. We can see it in all the imperialist countries that there is general support for the Palestinians, active and passive, and so on and so forth, among various layers of the population, the working class in particular. But there's been no split at all in terms of the ruling class or their political operatives, who have been absolutely solidly in support of the genocide and have fought tooth and nail to keep it running. And so that has brought a political isolation and demonstrated to people the nature of the system in many ways. But all the problem is, of course, without a left to actually draw that lesson out properly. As I say, applies to both those in the third world, the third world countries, and we've seen this all over. The questions of even if you go into places in Africa, like Kenya and so on, in which of course there is a general support among the regimes for the Israelis, and then contrast. But also, of course, within the imperialist countries themselves, and imperialist countries have been critical because obviously they run the world, and the US as the global hegemon in particular. In that way, it exposes the dictatorship of the capitalist class, the fact that the capitalist class actually runs the society and what it will allow, and the bourgeois democracy in many ways, so not in all ways, but in many ways is a cover for that dictatorship, that class control. And also, of course, the nature of the imperialist system itself, which is it's demonstrated quite well. Unfortunately, as I say, without a really proper global conscious left to draw that out, unfortunately you get strange things like notions that Israel runs half the world, which of course is just, it's just non-material. It's not a materialist understanding. So in those terms, you see that. So I think the other thing, the second part of this is to look at, the nature of what's happening in Gaza and so on. And I think in particular, I've drawn up like half of the agreement it's a 20-point agreement. It's full of junk, and it's very poor. It's really, there's virtually no detail. So go through some of the points of that. But this quote actually is very important and useful. Actually, what it dates back to 2004. The Amon Sofer, who was an advisor to Ariel Sharon, which is he's basically prefiguring the entire genocide over 20 years ago, with the event that when the Israelis pulled out of Gaza, and they pulled the settlements out of Gaza, basically said, okay, we'll shut the place up, and you lot can go away. And as they say, in terms of Gaza, we'll come and mow the grass every so often. We're on a war, a military assault on Gaza, which they did every 3 or 4 years. Excuse me. But what this does is it says basically we as the Israeli state understand that we're going to have to do some serious killing, i.e. a genocide, in some point. Which the point being here is that that it's not Netanyahu who's some kind of evil character, but the actual nature of the Israeli state and Zionism itself is genocidal, as it exists, and that this thing has been in preparation for 20 odd years. It's not something that's been done casually. And we can go through in terms of the coordination with imperialism and so on, the assistance provided by direct assistance.
20 minutes, Matthew.
Okay, the direct assistance are provided by various imperialist governments and so on, but I'll leave it there. So I think to go through bits of this, right? These are the first few points of Trump's deal. Gaza de-radicalized terror-free zone. In other words, to remove, essentially what they're saying is to remove the Gaza resistance. Now, the problem is, of course, being as we exist within the sort of media propaganda bubble, what they mean is the Gaza resistance. The Gaza resistance actually comprises of 10 separate militias, Palestinian militias, including, actually, interestingly enough, the Fatah militia, technically in the same organization as Mohammed Abbas, and some other groups which are actually formally part of the PLO. This thing actually splits the PLO right now. So in political terms, very interesting in terms for the Palestinians. Now, the thing is, obviously, that's not going to happen. Again, why would you, if you were the Palestinians and you spent 20 years digging a tunnel network and on the understanding these people are coming to get you and making sure you can produce arms and so on, so why would you give that up under conditions in which there's no control of a barbaric crew that are tempted to kill you? Gaza redevelops and benefit. The second point, of course, is to lie. The third point, the Israeli forces will withdraw for hostage release. Now, the Israeli forces have withdrawn to a degree. I think they've withdrawn to about 50% of Gaza, which Gaza is not very big. At this point, Gaza is a very small place, and it's been totally wrecked, as we know. Actually, the estimate is that 200,000 tons of bombs have been dropped on Gaza, which is the worst. And there is nothing else in human history that's done anything like that, but on such a small area, certainly. And that's more bombs than have been dropped in whole wars in between countries as opposed to small areas. So in those terms, and of course, the Israelis have not stopped. The Israelis are still killing Palestinians, as has been pointed out by the Gaza government media office. Up till Friday, they'd killed 38 Palestinians and wounded 143. So as Francesca Albanese said of Israeli ceasefires, it means you cease, we fire. So within 72 hours of Israel publicly accepting this agreement, all hostages alive and deceased will be returned. Now, obviously, that's been the case, and of course, the release of captured Palestinians. Now, Hamas or the resistance have released the 20 living captives. They've also, of course, tried to find as many of the other bodies as they can, given the place has been ruined. Many of those people have been killed by the Israeli bombardment itself, etc. And the Israelis, of course, use this as an excuse. the Israelis then did release 250 life sentence prisoners, which is a major advance in terms of, So, however, of course, they've refused to release some people like Mao and Barghouti. They've also illegally, under international law, illegally expelled of the 250, 154 have been expelled from any part of Palestine. So in those times, it's straight up illegal under international law to expel somebody from their own country. But of course, never mentioned. There'll be 1,718 Gazans released from the torture camps, mostly. Those people who were captured off the streets, etc. Have been treated appallingly badly, have been released. However, you have to understand that there were 5,000 people in Palestinians in Israeli jails on October the 6th, 2023. There are now, even with the people they've released here, 9,100. Which won't be a complete count because, of course, the Israelis don't account for those people they seized in Gaza. They're held in a sort of unofficial torture system. So nobody has a count of them, and the Israelis don't own to any of them. So it's difficult to say how many people they've actually got. But the best estimate at the moment is 9,000. So essentially, they've almost doubled the number of people they're actually holding. So yeah, I mean, it's so okay. The other thing, of course, is that they have released many of the bodies of dead Palestinians. I think 135 have been returned, most of them bearing the marks of torture, many of them bearing the marks of being summarily shot, etc. So, and no identification. They basically sent in containers full of corpses and no means of identification of those people. So then of course you've got point 6, which won't happen. Point 7 isn't happening. They've not released. They've not opened the borders. They've not opened Rafah. There are still trucks are still being held up. A few hundred trucks a day are getting into Gaza, and certainly not the kind of even the rescue team. I mean, there's actually a Turkish recovery team has gone in. I think supposed to get in today, but they've been held up. They were held up for 4 days. And of course, they won't let in heavy equipment. The thing is, the place is covered in rubble. There's about 70 million tons of rubble in Gaza, most of which is rebar concrete. You need heavy gear to shift it, and they don't want to allow any heavy gear into Gaza. Again, what the interesting here is that obviously the horrible what was called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is now finished. It's actually deceased. All of its sites have gone, and now we're back to the old system, which is the United Nations, the Red Cross, and NGOs. Again, not being allowed to operate properly or to bring in all the aid that's required. Given the fact that you've got a position in which the hospital system has been destroyed, there is now rampant infectious disease. There's all sorts of issues, and you need a mass aid program. Point 9 is essentially colonialism, because you need to impose an external body on governments of Palestine. Because obviously the thing about this, of course, is what it means is to say that the future, as far as the Trump agreement's concerned, the future of Palestine and Palestinians is not a matter which Palestinians themselves have anything to do with. So we can see. I mean, there's a question of impose this board of peace, and then underneath that, I think it was the Gaza International Transition Agency, which was supposed to be headed by Tony Blair, which is so good that it wasn't supposed to actually operate in Gaza. It's supposed to be based in Egypt because obviously they're terrified of meeting any Palestinians. So in those terms, the whole thing is unworkable. So I will leave it there. And we can discuss further. Thanks.
Thanks, Matthew. It's a really good lead off, very informative. So I'll throw the discussion open. Pop your hand up if you want to speak. Finn.
Comrades, I'd like to thank Matthew for his opening contribution. It's very informative, and I'm sure there's agreement amongst all of us here on his analysis of the Israeli assault on the Palestinian people, the torture, the imprisonment, the breach of previous agreements and the current agreement. There's agreement amongst us all, similarly, with regard to Trump. So I don't need to repeat any of these points, but I want to make a few points about the Palestinian leadership, which is a question we don't devote sufficient attention to in discussions of this nature. First of all, Hamas have been defeated. Gaza has been destroyed. 65,000 officially recognized has been killed in the onslaught, but probably 100,000 more dead, either from the effects of the attacks or buried under rubble. Hezbollah have been defeated. The Houthis have been defeated. So it would be a mistake on our part to try to convince ourselves or anybody else that somehow there's a victory in sight or the victories have been achieved. It's been a total defeat of Hamas, of Islamic Jihad, of Hezbollah, and of the Houthis. And we do need to spend time then looking at particularly Hamas. And Gaza is not Palestine. Gaza is a portion of Palestine. The Palestinian people live not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank, and the majority of the people in Jordan are Palestinians. There's Palestinians in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and many countries. Well, I spent time in the West Bank and I saw all the horrors that have been inflicted by Israel in the West Bank, many of them with the cooperation of the Palestinian Authority, because the Oslo Accords put responsibility for security on the Palestinian Authority, and that's one of the reasons why they lost credibility. But I want to make a reference here to a photograph that appeared recently in the Irish papers, and I'm sure internationally and probably in all the media, of 6 men on their knees, and standing behind them a number of people with rifles preparing to blow their heads off. Now, by using rifles in that situation, the skull would be shattered. Now, here we have barbarism, a barbaric act, public murder as performance, and it needs to be recognized for what it is. Now, public execution was banned in England centuries ago. The Saudi regime used to execute people in public, and people would attend in their hundreds and their thousands to watch beheadings by swordsmen working for the Saudi Authority. This barbarism needs to be described for what it is. And the assault of October the 7th was also barbaric, where people were murdered and shot as the Hamas and Islamic Jihad went from house to house. And then they killed, it's reported, 1,200. Some of those were, of course, killed by the IDF, but the assault and the attack was largely by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. And then they took 250 hostages. The International Criminal Court, which accused and is proceeding with the accusation against Netanyahu for war crimes, also indicted for war crimes the 2 principal leaders of Hamas. So the same court that indicted or is attempting to find guilty Netanyahu has also made the same accusations against Hania and another leader whose name escapes me now of Hamas. So we need to recognize the role that Hamas is now playing. We sometimes see them on the television screens marching around with masks and Kalashnikovs, trying to make some point. This for me is performance. This isn't politics, this is performance. Trying to show they have not been defeated, they have been defeated. Now, the Palestinians have always had a very bad leadership. Going back to the aristocratic landlord leadership, in the period of the United Nations, the decision in 1948, and the period running up to that, a couple of families, Nashishabis and Husseinis, were recognized by the British principally as the leadership of the Palestinians. These were landlords. And the British appointed one of them, Husseini, as what was described as the Mufti. He was supposed to be the representative. Then after that, we then had leadership from, say, the PLO for a period. And a lot of people had illusions in the PLO. But when you break it down and look at it more closely, the PLO ended up resorting to just killings, not just airplane hijackings, but also killings like in the Munich Olympics. And there was the Palestinian Front for the Liberation, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine conducted a massacre of, I think it might have been 1,000, or certainly hundreds of students in an area of Israel. When Hamas first entered the scene back in, say, what was called the Second Intifada, there was a period of bus bombings, killings of innocent civilians in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, and other places. And in fact, Netanyahu and the Israeli government supported Hamas at that time through the Qatari regime in order to create divisions with Fatah. Now, Hamas's original program was to abolish Israel and even to incorporate Israel into an Islamic state. So Palestine, including Israel, would have become, according to their scenario, which is absolutely foolish, would become an Islamic state. They changed that. In more recent years, they dropped that particular perspective. That was the approach. And by the way, the PLO had a similar approach of just militarily defeating Israel. Now, any of these groups that attempted to defeat Israel militarily themselves were defeated, and not just defeated, but in some cases obliterated. Now, anybody who can look at what's now the state in Gaza and declare some kind of a victory. I mean, that one point I would disagree with Matthew on is this emphasis on the difficulties in the Red Sea, which are experienced by the shipping companies. The aim of the Houthi attacks was to assist Hamas in the liberation of the Palestinian people. That has not been achieved. Now, American shipping has been damaged, of course, inevitably, because of the Red Sea access. But the purpose of the attacks was to help to liberate Palestine. We're now further away from a Palestinian state than ever. In fact, the Palestinian state, the basis for the state, has been destroyed by people like Smotrich and Gvir in Israel with the support of the Netanyahu government. And the strategy of the Israeli government is to incorporate and annex what they call the biblical lands, and they call them Judea and Samaria, the West Bank in reality, into Israel. So the perspective of Houthis to liberate Palestine has been ended. And that was also an aim of the revolt in Lebanon by Hezbollah, was to assist the Palestinians. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because we need to look, we're not a kind of psychological group or a self-help group trying to understand why things happen. We know why it happened. We know why Hamas gets support. We know why Hezbollah gets support. We know why the insurrections happen and why some of these events, horrific though they be, happen. We know that's what the reasons are, but we're not here to understand the reasons. Because we're a political and an international movement, we have to analyze events, analyze the leadership, analyze the policies, and put forward alternative policies. And just one illustration. When there's a discussion about Palestine and about the ceasefire, what consultation was conducted by Hamas to get the information and the ideas of the Palestinian people in Gaza? None. Now, I'm not saying you can convene a mass meeting in Gaza now. Obviously, the conditions don't allow for that. But there has to be consultation. There has to be involvement of the people. Hamas no longer represent the people of Gaza. That has been shown by several surveys and opinion polls recently. The majority of people now in Gaza either support the involvement of the PA, or some of them, quite a significant group, also support an international group. They want the war to end, and they blame some of the destruction conducted by Israel on Hamas because of the war that they are conducting. Now, Israel is responsible for the horrors it committed. That's not in doubt. That's why I said at the beginning there's agreement amongst us all about the horrors being perpetrated by Israel. But what we have to focus on as well is what is the alternative. Now, there was a time when people were carried away by, for instance, the revolution in Cuba and Castro and South American guerrillism, and that was the new form of advance, and the old idea of the working class uniting and overthrowing capitalism was kind of pushed to the side, and everybody looked at, and not everybody, sorry, a number of left-wing people looked towards Castro and Cuba and South America. That was a false perspective. And now there's an attempt, I say here in Ireland, in fact, the interesting references that Matthew made is right about the ditch and other things that are significant in Ireland. The ditch has also exposed the use of the Israeli Air Force, where they use Irish airspace. And in Ireland also, we succeeded in throwing out the fundraising efforts, the Israeli bond sales as well. That's now gone off to Luxembourg. But anyway, these are important events. So we do need to focus on what kind of policies we need to advance. And it's not sufficient, like that's why I mentioned South America. It's not sufficient to say, well, these people are involved, they're the resistance. They're not the resistance. I approached a group of Hezbollah fans on a demonstration here. They were carrying the Hezbollah flag and wearing the green colours. And so I went up to discuss with them. And the only point they could make in the discussion, I was trying to understand what's going on there, was that they are the resistance. And Hamas translates, which it does in Arabic, as the resistance. But that's not an answer. The support that they had in Gaza is declining. The Palestinian Authority, as I've explained, became an arm of the Israeli government. And if we're going to find a way out of the crisis, we have a responsibility to discuss the role that Hamas has played, the role that Hezbollah has played, the role that the Houthi have played, all of the Arab regimes, principally the monarchies, and they were put there by Britain, by the way. It was Britain that allowed the Saudi regime to set itself up. And then later on, the Americans moved in as the principal supporters. But all the Gulf monarchies were all fans of the British at the time. That's what they represent. And that hasn't changed. Egypt is a very hostile group to, very hostile towards the Palestinians. We need to recognize that. So there's no solution in looking towards the Arab regimes. They're either monarchical or dictatorial regimes right across the Middle East. Jordan would just be as a tool of imperialism as well. And as I said, the majority there were Palestinians. In fact, the Jordanian government conducted a one-sided civil war against the Palestinians in Jordan. So there's no solution looking to them either. The solution is working class unity. There has to be a working class unity between Jewish workers, Arab workers, right across the region. Workers in Egypt have the same class interest as workers in Israel. And that interest is not being furthered by the campaigns and actions of Hamas. And I would say, just in conclusion, that Hamas will have lost a lot of support with these performance murders that they did recently by getting people to kneel down and shoot them in the back of the heads with rifles. That's a barbaric act. And the expression that we have sotism or barbarism, this is an example of it. Now, Israel has done the same. Israel has also conducted barbaric acts, but we don't need to convince ourselves of that because we know that and we accept that that's the case. But we do need to discuss a bit more about where Hamas is leading the people or attempting to lead the people of Gaza. And like I said, Gaza is not Palestine. Gaza is a section of the Palestinian people. Palestinians also live, as you know, in the West Bank and other countries like Jordan, Lebanon, and other places. Now, I'm sorry if I went on with long comrades, but I do think we need to give emphasis and put a focus on the way out. It's okay to condemn Trump, which we all agree, or condemn the IDF, which we all agree about, but we also need to examine carefully and analytically, scientifically, with a Marxist perspective, what is the solution and what is our analysis of the groups that declare themselves as being the leaders of the revolution. And if there's going to be a solution, if there's going to be a Palestinian state, then it will not be achieved by following the methods of Hamas or the PLO or the landlord class in Israel or the monarchies or the other right-wing regimes of the Arab countries across the region. Thanks, comrades.
Thanks very much, Finn. Temos?
Well, first of all, I want to also to thank Matthew for a very, very thorough, interesting assessment of the situation about Palestine and Israel and the relationship to the what is being done in the world as a whole about this issue. And I would agree with most of what Finn has said, but I would see it in a different light. I mean, all this is most of it is true, but it's only half the truth, because it is important to understand what's happening. It's important to understand why the Palestinian people support Hamas. It's important to understand why Hamas is a dominant force. I mean, I don't think there is anybody here who disagrees that Hamas are criminals, theocratic criminals. That's clear, and it shouldn't be a question of discussing it. I mean, the question is, what was the alternative for Palestinians? Palestinians, Finn says, that should join up with Israeli workers Palestinian workers join up with Israeli workers and fight together. Is that possible? And what would be the result of that? Again, you would have the same people, the same countries, the same imperialists attacking this attempt, and it would be the same massacre all over again. Finn says that Hamas has been defeated. Has it? I'm not too sure about that. The Palestinian people have been defeated. The Palestinian people have been massacred. Hamas doesn't care about it. Hamas is a theocratic organization that it only sees the good of the cause. They're prepared to die for what they are doing. They don't mind if they die. They don't mind if the Palestinian people die, as long as what they understand about their struggle and about Palestine it goes forward, and it has gone forward. I mean, the Palestinian case has all but been forgotten before the October attack. The Arab regimes were coming to terms with Israel and America and trying to agree on forgetting Palestine. Hamas was in Gaza. What was happening in the West Bank where Hamas was not there? The same ethnic cleansing was going on every day. The same extremists in the Israeli government, Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, they were helping the settlers to kill Palestinians, to clear the villages, to make more settlements. And the ethnic cleansing was going on in a slower pace than is going on today in Gaza. So the whole thing, it would not make any difference whether Hamas made the attack on October or didn't make it, whether they are barbaric or they are not barbaric. The cause is the occupation. And if we argue in the way Finn argues, we are missing the point. We are missing the point because we are seeing it as a question that the Palestinians and the Israeli workers could settle it. They couldn't settle it. It's us, everybody in the West and the world as a whole, that we should see what we can do. And the main perpetrator of violence here is not Hamas. It's the Israeli government, it's the IDF, is the settlers, is the ethnic cleansing that is the main issue. And you have to understand this. And the solution is not going to be in Palestine and Israel. It's going to be in the Arab countries where all these nasty regimes are in power, when they try to come to terms with the imperialists at the expense of the Palestinian people. And whatever support they give to Palestine is because they are afraid of their own safety in their countries and that they are afraid of risings there. And we should understand that it is an international issue, and unless there is a complete break with imperialism, a complete break with the capitalist regimes everywhere in the Arab world, in the West, in America, in Europe, nothing is going to change. The massacres will go on. I mean, this agreement that they achieved, nobody believes that it's going to hold. It will hold for a while, and then it will break down. We already had skirmishes and bombardments by the Israeli army in Rafah because of they say that Hamas shot at them. They threw one anti-tank missile, anti-tank round at Israeli tanks, and some Kalashnikov fire. And they came in with all the heavy bombardment and accusing Hamas for starting. And what were they doing? They were trying to dismantle terrorist infrastructure. That's code for we're shooting at Palestinian, at Hamas people. So we should be careful. This is not the time to blame Hamas. Hamas, they are criminal, terrorist, theocratic organization. Nobody here believes anything else. Why discuss about this? The question is who can make the peace hold? It's the Israeli government, and it's the American government, and it's the West. So I should be very, very careful on turning the discussion the way Finn has done. It's very dangerous. It's very dangerous, and it shows a lack of understanding of what is going on there in Gaza, in Palestine, in the West Bank, and in Israel itself.
Thanks, Temos. Roy, would you like to go next? You need to unmute yourself. Sorry, I can't do it.
Yeah. I want to also congratulate Matthew for summarizing the last 2 years in Gaza and Palestine. I must say that I also am of the view that Hamas's behavior and actions, as the military actions, have been suicidal and has caused tremendous suffering and unnecessary murder, slaughter, and so on. And that cannot be justified in any particular way. And I think I agree that we need to find with Finn, we need to find other ways of looking at this. The Palestine issue, we've been reminded, has been an issue which has been imposed, a colonial situation which has been imposed on the Palestinian people since even before 1948. It goes all back almost to 100 years. I'm looking at, in terms of the kind of Blair, Kushner, Witkoff, Trump scenario, the kind of plans they put, what alternative can we put? And I think one of the signals or markers we have is when Germany imposed, or when Germany went on a genocidal spree, we've had a dismantling of the German state. We've had a demilitarization of Germany. And I think Israel, the smaller country, perhaps something that we need to put forward as an alternate. It may not come in the short term or the medium term, but something to hold up for the dismantling of Israel, the state of Israel, which has been recognized as a Zionist state, and the demilitarization of Israel. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. Ahmad? Oh, you're there.
Sorry. I just had a couple of points to make, if I may. Let me put this away because then you can hear me better, probably better. I've got a couple of points I wanted to make. One was with regard to the issue of what Finn raised. I think it is, I mean, many points that Finn did make perfect sense, followed from what Matthew said. But there were a couple of points which I had, and that is the general approach which has been put forward to a large extent, I think, by the Israeli media and obviously the general official media, if you like, that the issue is between Israel and Hamas. It isn't. I don't think it is. I don't think Finn actually believed it is. I think it was just stressing on one point, probably a little bit more than the other points. The issue is not Hamas. Whether Hamas gets defeated or not defeated, the Houthis get defeated or not defeated. I think that's from the angle of what the media tries to put forward of what defeat means. Insofar as the issue of Palestine is concerned, the issue is for the Palestinian people. And the perpetrator of that is the one that is actually stopping it, is Israel. I'm not going to go into issues as why Israel does this or not, and whether is US towing Israel or whether Israel is towing US, for that matter, or what the European governments have done with regard to this. That's not the point which I wanted to make. I think the issue is that Hamas is not the point. The points that was made throughout the Palestine was the issue of their right and their self-determination from that point of view, of them being able to control their lives. Hamas, like Qataris, like the Islamic Republic of Iran, like the Saudis, like everybody else, is one of the forces in between, and they all have got their own agenda. And today we had, just now, 5 minutes ago, we had bombardment of Gaza again, because Israel said that Hamas has broken the rules, etc., etc. They portray this as the war between Israel and Hamas. That is not the case. I think this is not the case, and everybody knows the issue is not Hamas. I think if we go on about concentration on whether Hamas is or what it is or what it isn't, irrespective of the fact that everybody, I think, knows that Hamas is a reactionary force, it doesn't help the issue of Palestine at the moment. The issue of Palestine is right now that this 20-point that they put forward, as was rightly said, does not have any involvement of Palestinian people. And soon as you put that out, every force, whether it's Hamas, whether it's jihadis, whether it is Saudis, whether it is Americans, whether it is Israelis, everybody else will follow their own agenda. And they would try to portray as if they are the main player. The main player are the people in Palestine. I think one of the issues that I actually said a lot about this, imagine a strip fully bombarded, 80 million tons of rubble, I think Matthew said, with that all in place. Still, they're going back to the same land they were. They're saying we're not giving up. That is not Hamas. That's a movement which is taking place there. And if we recognize that movement, Hamas in itself, and by concentrating on Hamas or any other force, jihadis, Houthis, etc., none of them would actually be in tune and in harmonic with what the people in Palestine are saying. In West Bank and others, the extreme or each force in here, whether Israel says from the sea to the river or whether Hamas says from the sea to the river, they're all following their own agenda. The Palestinian people there want to have an ability to actually say, people can come back, we could stay here, we could make a decision for our own lives. I think that's the issue. And any other issue that we try to emphasize, I'm not saying it's incorrect or correct, but I think if you lose focus on this point in the general propaganda or general speeches or whatever, we may actually fall into the trap of making this a war between Israel and Hamas or any other party, or between the Houthis and the Americans. It's not that. They're all following their own agenda, and they all benefit from continuation of this war. That's what they're there for. So I think the focus got to go back to that point, not whether anybody's comments about Hamas or any other party in here is correct or incorrect. The issue is here right now is this. And I think there is, if I may just take one more minute, just one other issue. I think also the issue is not just the Israel intention of genocide. That's one point. We got to look at the whole Middle East. The idea of Israel being the only force in the area that can say whatever they want. It spreads all the way across to Iran on the eastern side, and it goes all the way to the west. The idea is there is a bigger war at the background between China, US, etc., and the geopolitical position, let's say, of Iran. The situation that they have in Afghanistan at the moment, the intentions of China, all of these are playing a role. And Israel in here is also pursuing its own end, and at the same time trying to sing in tune with one of these multipolar parts in the world. And I think our intention therefore should be Israel, Palestine, and the Middle East, which is actually being caught in here in this war. And that is what is actually happening at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And Eric? Are you there? Eric? You've got your hand up, are you receiving us? Eric's take his hand down, is he not? Are you going to unmute, Eric? Oh, thank you. Right, great. Hello.
I'm sorry, my phone never cooperates. I have to hit that damn button 10 times before it opens thing up. Anyway, good morning,
Yeah, you're
all of
here
you.
now.
It's an interesting conversation. I'm so impressed with how thoughtful all of you are about it. And I hope I can be forgiven for something that's a little simplistic and very kind of America-centric. We all understand the state of Israel would not exist as it does were it not for the complete backing of the United States. And just, you know, I have my ideas about what I would call for if we had a party, if we had a bigger voice for what ought to happen there. But in the meantime, wanting to interact with the movement, as I try to do, I'm at meetings and I attend these rallies and I talk to younger activists. The point is, we don't want to backstop the military of Israel anymore. And I really think that ought to be the focus. You know, the people who live there, the Arabs and the Jews, hopefully cooler heads, people oriented to the working class, will prevail in those debates if the arms stop flowing there. So that's what I focus on. Just stop backstopping the state of Israel, amplify that. We ought to spend that wealth in our own societies. That's particularly striking in the US, where so many billions of dollars go to support the Zionist project. Anyway, thank you so much. I'll enjoy listening to the rest of the talk.
Thanks, Eric. There's no other hands up. I don't know where they're either. Finn wants to respond to some responses that came to your remarks, or whether Matthew wants to respond to anything. Nobody seems to want to say anything.
Oh, sorry.
Finn, do you want to go first?
I only want to make one point.
Okay.
Yeah, go on.
Just one single point. I mean, I agree entirely with all of the criticisms of Israel, all of them. The executions, the killings, the destruction of the country, all of that. And I agree completely with the point about the conflict is not between Israel and Gaza. The conflict is a far, far wider conflict, and Israel's ambitions go well beyond Gaza. I agree with all of that. And the solution to the problem is not a peace agreement between Israel and Hamas. The solution is far wider, like the point Aman made. So I just wanted to say that the points I made were very specific, and I focused on the issue of Hamas because of all the publicity surrounding Hamas at the present time. But all the points about Israel, I'm in complete agreement with. So nobody needs to point out to me how bad Israel is. I know about it. And as I said, I was there. I went on a visit there and we met all the various groups that were involved, Palestinian groups. We met Breaking the Silence, that's the Jewish ex-army people. We saw human rights groups. We saw lots of groups in the West Bank. So I'm familiar with that. I saw the discrimination, the roads, the separation wall, the destruction of the dignity of Palestinian people, the searches, the blockades. I saw all of that. So I don't need to comment about Israel, how bad it is. But I just focus on that one point because I think in the discussions we have about this issue, we don't spend enough time analyzing what is the solution, what is the way out of this situation. And the way out is not going to be a military victory. And that's the mistake that was made by the PLO, by the Democratic Front, by Hamas, by Hezbollah, by Islamic Jihad. That's the mistake they all make, that a military victory is possible. So that's the point I'm trying to make, that it's a far broader issue. And I just focused on Hamas, not because I disagree with any point or any comment that's made about Israel. I agree with all of these arguments. Just I think we need to have more discussion on what is the way out of this situation. How are we going to create a situation in which the workers will be involved and will gain and will advance as a collective body of a class across the region? That's why I make the points that I make. That's all I wanted to say, Pam.
Okay, thanks, Finn. Matthew, did you want to sort of come in and respond to anything?
I think there's a few things. I mean, I think I think first of all that the problem you've got is that this is about imperialism itself. I mean, it's not. I mean, in some ways, it's about obviously it's about the state of Israel as the centre point of the imperialist control of the entire region. So you're looking at it is a Middle Eastern question. It covers the whole region, and obviously you're looking at not merely Israel, but you're also looking at all the different regimes in the Arab countries, all of which, of course, have supported the Israeli government. Essentially, have suppressed their own people, or the general people of the Middle East are in support of the Palestinians. Of course, have been have been heavily suppressed, in those terms. I mean, they've been, it's been like holding the screwing down the lid on the pressure cooker. Now, I mean, the thing is, obviously, at some point, it starts to blow out, so you see what's happening in Morocco now. Actually, it's spread to Algeria as well, So the whole question, again, it's a general thing. And I think the problem is, really, then becomes the question really should be set on the basis of, well, okay, what does the working class do in terms of the imperialist system trying to maintain the suppression of the Middle East and of course Gaza in particular. I mean, the thing is that what you've got is the focus of the whole of the imperialist system on a tiny strip of land with 2.1 or 2.3 million people. And the death toll is unbelievable. I mean, it's bigger than anybody said. Actually, there was an estimate some months ago that it's actually was approaching 400,000 people. And probably more than that. You're probably looking at 500,000 people being killed in this particular genocide. And as I say, I mean, particularly the whole business. But of course, it's based on the fact, as a point I'm making, is that is the nature of the Israeli state itself. Israel was always going to do that at some point. It was looking for a chance to do that. Because they, as you say, they decided that obviously they need a suppression of that, and we can look at the history of people at Hamas, which actually was formed in 1987 with the assistance of the Israeli political police, the Shin Bet. It was known and documented as a means of splitting the PLO. Now the point being is that, okay, but I mean, if you're sitting in Gaza, these people are coming. These people are going to come in at some point. So what they've done is they've run a military a resistance strategy on that basis. They've built a resistance, which in those terms, I mean, they've actually managed amazingly. It's an incredible feat to run a resistance for 2 years, which is basically, as the Israelis said, well, okay, if you look at Al-Qassam, the actual, because I say, you look at there's this conflation between Hamas and the Gaza resistance. Because the Gaza resistance, the people actually doing the fighting, actually consists of 10 different militias. Gaza's Al-Qassam being the largest of them. Al-Qassam itself was estimated as having lost 10,000 fighters up till the ceasefire in January, and recruited 10,000 more. So effectively it was the same size, and it effectively kept going. And as you could say for all the other groups, I mean, you can see it's all still happening. It's still there. And this is the problem the Israelis have got, that they can't actually suppress the resistance, nor could the Americans suppress the Houthi. Now, obviously, the cost is vast. The cost is unconscionable and vast. But the point being is that the real factor here is the action of the working class itself in particularly the imperialist countries. And I said, I mean, I remember saying this when this started, so it's going to be the imperialist countries actually going to be key to this. If we draw, I'm not trying to draw a balance sheet on this, because obviously it's, trying to give you a view of what's happened, But I think the key question here is the action of the working class in the rest of the world in support of the rights of the Palestinian people, which has been vast, as we've seen, but not, and has had real effect. I mean, real effect. You have to say that, and you can point to a whole series of points that has actually made a difference. Not enough of a difference, but a difference. And the point is also, you see now, of course, as I say, the system itself has been exposed. People can see that both that the people who govern them, are monsters. They're bloodthirsty monsters. I mean, these people who appear as politicians and so on and so forth and try and kiss babies, and they're killers, all of them. And they don't turn a hair about killing hundreds of thousands of people in the most brutal ways possible. And that's a lesson for the whole world, and to take it very seriously. The point is also to say, well, the nature of the imperialist system, and that system operates in that way. And the question being, as I say, is then, okay, how does the world actually change that? How is it that those regimes are attacked and taken down? Can Meloni in Italy be overthrown? Very possible, and it will be, if it happens, Palestine will be a major factor. We've seen it across Europe. It's a huge question. It's also a huge question in the US. It's part of Trump's suppression, attempt to suppress all forms of, and the Democrats actually, both Trump and the Democrats attempting to suppress the pro-Palestine movement in the US. So it's been a critical political point. And I think that you need to look at it in those sort of global terms, and to say, well, okay, is it possible, as Comrade Eric was saying, is it possible to cut off the supply of money and weapons to Israel? And it's perfectly possible, absolutely perfectly possible. And you can see that, as the comrade we had in the other week, Ofer Kassif, said, in terms of actually cutting down in terms of BDS and so on and so forth, and that is critical to the change in the circumstance. Ofer Kassif, of course, and his comrade Ayman Odeh was actually thrown out of the Knesset. During Trump's speech, not covered at all in the Western media, of course. They were thrown out for demanding a Palestinian state. They're sort of casual savagery. Okay, and as the comrade said, he's in danger of his life. He knows what sort of forces he's looking at. But as I say, that's it's a world question, a world balance. But I think it's attempting to say, it's also to say, well, this has changed the balance really, because now Israel is hated throughout the world. They can't appear, people want them thrown out of everything. They want them thrown out of all sporting events. They don't want to trade with them. They don't want to see them. They want soldiers. They want the IDF to be arrested. Which technically under the Genocide Convention, they can be. The Genocide Convention forms part of law in many countries. Actually, you could if it was so determined, and we should be demanding this, that all IDF members should be arrested as soon as they enter any country, because they're obviously war criminals, a lot of them. All as I say, I think I agree with comrades in terms of saying, to draw a balance sheet has to be done on a global question, on a global basis, and not purely on an Israel-Palestine basis. Thanks.
Thanks, Matthew. Anything else? Marcy. I assume that was you putting your hand up. Did you want to speak, Marcy? You'll need to unmute if you just put your hand up. I wasn't sure if you were. No? Right, Roger wants to go, and then if Marcy does want to say anything, we'll take her next. Roger? You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Pam. I wasn't going to speak in this because other comrades are absolutely brilliantly well informed on this. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate Matthew on a really, really very thorough and very interesting and well worked out intro, and also Finn for the very, very good points that he also made. I think there's so many things that arise from this. First of all, I think it's right to note the importance of this struggle in terms of the consciousness of the working class worldwide. I think Matthew was right to stand on that point, to start on that point, that there's probably never been such a widespread, massive uprising almost of the population in every country, including in the USA too, by the way, of solidarity with the Palestinian people, and horror and revulsion at the actions of the barbaric Israeli regime. And I think it shows that the traditions of solidarity with the Russian Revolution in 1917 to 1920, the solidarity with the Spanish people during the Spanish Civil War, of solidarity with the South Africans during the struggle against apartheid and so on, that despite misgivings that there have been in for some time, that maybe those traditions are getting eroded or getting or dying out or fading, that's absolutely not the case. It shows the international solidarity is alive like never before. Now, in this struggle, um, in every kind of struggle that we've seen in the last century or so, we've seen that solidarity with the people does not mean identification with the political formations and groups that are leading them. We our Irish comrades played a big part in defending internationalist ideas and the ideas of proletarian solidarity in opposition to those sectarians who said that we had to support the provisional IRA, and said that the Protestants should be thrown into the sea, and so on. We supported the wholeheartedly the anti-apartheid struggle without endorsing the platform of the ANC. We involved ourselves in the worldwide solidarity. Another thing that I should have included before, the solidarity with the Vietnamese people during the Vietnam War, but we resisted and expressed revulsion at the slogan of the other left groups of Ho 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 Chi Minh, a complete blanket endorsement of the people who happen to be leading and misleading in many of these cases the struggle. So it shows this question of internationalism is the key. Now, on the question of who won, obviously you can't say that the Palestinian people have won. They've been absolutely, there is no word for the crushing defeat that they have suffered, the terrible horrors of the situation now. There's we can't say that Hamas won. Hamas was, apart from anything else, apart from their reactionary ideology, apart from all of that, it was actually tactically incredibly stupid. The events of 7th of October 2023. It did nothing to advance the cause of the Palestinian people and plunged them into unimaginable horrors. Now, it's true that Israel, at the very least, they seized hold of that excuse and that pretext to intensify their oppression on the Palestinian people, and maybe provoked it. And of course, at every opportunity, they've seized on the blunders and the reactionary positions of the leadership of the Palestinian struggle, whether of the PLO, but particularly of Hamas, in order to justify their further repression. And by the way, Israel set up Hamas, and Israel encouraged and financed the development of Hamas precisely in order to give them an added pretext in order to crush the Palestinian people. So this discussion, I think, has been one of the best we've had. It's been a really, really enlightening for all of us. One thing is, I hope that both Matthew and Finn will write their arguments down and put them on the website. That we need to use the website now to discuss. I think it's something I've thought for some time, that many of the discussions we have in this in these meetings have been absolutely, some of the best discussions I've ever been involved in or ever participated in. But I think we let them go. Yes, we put them on the website. I don't know how many people watch the videos. We should also put them on YouTube. I don't know how many people watch the videos. We should also put them in writing on the website as a permanent record of our position on all this. I also think we should remember that the Palestinian people have their own traditions. I think the original Intifada was not led by any of the Palestinian groups, certainly not Hamas, and not by the PLO either. But there were a spontaneous uprising of the population in both the West Bank and in Gaza. I think, it's been a defeat. Whether it's a complete defeat, I don't know. Israel's objective was to completely exterminate the Palestinian people by massacring and by driving out any of the survivors. And that may still be the outcome. We don't know. But so far, it does not look as if they've succeeded in their full objective. That doesn't mean, of course, that in any sense it's a victory for Hamas. We have to stand firm on proletarian internationalism, that difficult though it may seem, far-fetched as it may seem, we still have to stand firm on the position that we stand for solidarity of the working class and for unity of the Israeli and the Arab working class, not only in Israel, Palestine, but in the whole region. And I do think we still need to put forward the demand for a socialist United States of the entire region of North Africa and the Middle East. Thanks, colleagues.
Thanks, Roger. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously the genocide and support by the United States for Israel's genocide is, I think, exposed the role of U.S. imperialism and Israel as a colonizer of the Middle East for U.S. imperialism, an alliance with U.S. imperialism. But I think we can't leave out, really, the role of the trade union bureaucracy around the world. These strikes in Italy were really a rank and file rebellion from below of dock workers and other workers. And there's a rank and file movement. There was a conference of European dock workers. But the pro-Zionist leadership of International Confederation of Trade Unions, the AFL-CIO, is operated internationally to prevent any kind of labor action, of a labor blockade. The Palestinian unions have called for a labor blockade of Palestine, of Israel, in support, in support of the struggle of Palestine. And the Zionists really run these international labor federations. That's a fact. And the AFL-CIO is not unique. They're Zionists in the leadership of trade union federations around the world who support Zionism. And I think that you can't leave that out, especially when you're fighting to mobilize workers in the unions, as we are in the United States, to take labor action for Palestine. The biggest obstacle is the AFL-CIO, which even in San Francisco tried to prevent a discussion on Palestine. Liz Schuler, the AFL-CIO, sent a letter saying that you couldn't even discuss it in the San Francisco Labor Council. But that's been going on nationally for some time. And I think that you can't talk about Palestine and international solidarity without talking about the role of the trade union bureaucracy.
Finn, do you want to go back in? You've got your hand up, Finn. Is that a legacy hand? Do you want to speak again?
Yeah, I just want to recognize that's an important distinction that Roger made between the first and second Intifada. The first Intifada in the late 80s was a mass movement which took the Israeli regime completely by surprise. It was principally youth turning out in massive numbers, opposing an armed and weaponized opposition in the form of the police. It wasn't a military uprising, it was a mass movement of people. What became known as the Second Intifada was where Hamas became involved. And then there was a series of killings and bombings and civilians being slaughtered and so on. So that's an important distinction. That's why I think, incidentally, just as a passing comment, I don't think the expression international intifada is a useful expression. The general strike in Italy should be called a general strike. See, the word intifada doesn't have that currency in the West. It associates it with some kind of activities within Gaza. A general strike is a general strike, and we all understand that. There were strikes in Spain, there were strikes in Belgium, there were strikes in India on the docks against the transportation of material. Let's call them strikes. I think the expression intifada or international intifada doesn't have any currency or any meaning internationally. No, that's not a crucial point. It's only a matter of terminology. But if we're going to have terminology, let's have it meaningful. And let's call what's happening in Italy a general strike rather than some part of some international intifada. But anyway, it's an important distinction Roger made between a mass movement in the first Intifada and then the second Intifada, as it became known, which resulted from Sharon going across into the Muslim sites. But nonetheless, The Second Intifada involved killings and violence and bombings and civilians being slaughtered in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, whereas the First Intifada, as it became known, was a mass peaceful movement of the people and principally the youth within Israel.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Right, there's no more hands up.
Can I just do one thing to end?
Yeah, I was just going back to you, Matthew. You
Yeah,
want
all
to
right,
make some
right,
closing
okay,
comments?
yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying if there are no more hands up, you make your closing comments, please.
Okay, right. Well, thanks, comrades. I think it's been useful, and I think I okay. I mean, Intifada just means struggle, but I mean, I'm not overly. I was being having a go at obviously the efforts to suppress it rather than say okay, we're going to label it that. I think the as I say, the point being is that it's the action of the class globally that's been critical in these terms. I think that I don't think that this is particularly a victory for the Israelis or the imperialists. There's been enormous damage in many ways done to Israel and its position and and in terms of its military situation and and the state of its army and so on and so forth. And it will, if it recovers, it will take decades to do so. It's in those terms. If they have a victory, it's a Pyrrhic one. And the question is then, as I say, it's the reaction of the rest of the world, particularly in the imperialist countries, which hold the key here. It's the working class and the imperialist countries that hold the key. I think the other bunch of people for me, I think that deserve recognition in this are the journalists of Gaza. They're the first people to expose a genocide or one of these appalling wars, and obviously the imperialists are very fond of conducting appalling wars generally against civilian populations with mass slaughter. And we could go through Iraq, Afghanistan, the rest. For the first time, a bunch of people have said, "Well, we will put that on your screen on your phone, and you will see the horrors you can watch, and you can see what these people do and how they do it." And the murderous nature of this, and the damage it does, and it's that has changed in many ways. Has changed the situation. The fact that happened, and those people said, despite, as I say, the Israelis desperate as part of the genocide, and the appalling thing. I mean, if you look at the way that they conducted the genocide, they actually went through and said, okay, well, we'll just try and wipe out, sections of the population, intellectuals. I mean, there's been a scholasticized, an effort to exterminate intellectuals and university professionals in Gaza. There's been, even an effort to exterminate local government workers in Gaza. And you can go through it one thing after another. Even the guys maintaining the water system have been targeted. But the journalists have been critical because they've put it out there and they've showed it to the world. And that has changed. That as much as anything has changed the situation. And okay, that's possible now, more possible because of social media and the internet and the ability to communicate. But it's down to those people and their bravery and professionalism that they did it. And the world owes them a debt, and it should acknowledge that debt. I think that also. In those terms, it's the then what comes out of this, is it weakens the whole situation across the region, for the imperialists, and opens the questions in a whole series of countries. I mean, as I say, we've seen a revolt in Morocco. We're seeing the beginnings of such things in Algeria. I think it will spread. Because it's certainly there, and it's certainly done enormous damage to all the regimes in the Middle East. And I don't think the question is finished by in a long shot. And I'm hoping that this will carry on. I look forward to hearing from the comrade from Italy in terms of the building of that massive strike, which is historic, a very historic event. Thanks.
Right, Roy, have you something more to say?
Yeah, if I could just squeeze one point.
Mhm.
And I think the demand should still be made that the people of Palestine be compensated, that there be reparations, how it's computed and so on. That is something that can be worked out or should be worked out, but it shouldn't just be, all right, we've killed you and we walk away. I think the world, we've said the imperialists, many countries, including South Africa, we believe, have been supplying weapons or parts, components, and so on. All of these have made them complicit in various ways. And I think all of that, there should be something to do. It's not just money won't solve it, but I think on the broader issue, there should be consequences, there should be compensation, and so on. Thank you.
And the criminals should be named. We should have a naming of the people who are responsible, and they should be hunted down. You know, we should take it as a responsibility that these people should be pursued.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. I think we seem to be talked out now. Nobody's disagreeing with me. Yeah, so thanks, Matthew. It was a really good lead off and lots of good contributions. And, you know, it's quite good when we have disagreements and they can be handled in a comradely manner. So thank you to everybody that has contributed to the controversial bits. So if we move on to Roger now about next week's meeting.
Yes, next week we've got a rare privilege. Some of the comrades will remember that 5 years ago there was an uprising in Belarus, and several times we had comrades from Belarus, trade union activists, trade union leaders who participated in meetings of ours and led off, and we had several discussions, both at the WIN meetings and privately, with some quite heroic figures who were leading that struggle or playing a major part in that struggle. Now, the main comrade, our comrade Gennady, who was the leader of one of the unions called REP, he was victimized particularly harshly by the regime, and he was jailed, and he spent I think 3 to 4 years in jail in horrific conditions, and he's only in the last few weeks he's been released, of course on not on the terms that that are justified or that we would accept as reasonable. He's been exiled. He's been denied access to the only source of income he had, which was a pension, and he's separated from his family. But we're back in contact with him, and he's agreed to speak to us next week about the struggle in Belarus and about the whole experience and the perspectives for the revival of the struggle in the coming period. So I hope every comrade will come. It's a very rare event, and we're very honoured that the comrade has accepted our invitation.
Thanks very much, Roger. So that's the end of the meeting. Hope to see you all next week. Bye.